Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation from the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's video, The Arithmetic of Freemasonry, is another work by the estimable F. de P. Castells and comes from a 1914 lecture. It's very long and very complex, so I've decided to split it into two videos. The first section will deal with the numbers 3, 5 and 7, and the second section, the number 15. It's quite a challenging journey, so I hope you enjoy it.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation from the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
What we familiarly call arithmetic has been, historically, one of the most potent factors in the development of the human mind, and, as it is one of the liberal arts and sciences on which Freemasonry has been founded, the study of it should help us to understand some of the ideas underlying the ritual of the craft. The architect, the geometrician, and every Mason, whether operative or free and speculative, are absolutely dependent on the science of numbers. Long ago, Pythagoras made his whole system of philosophy rest on the conception of numbers as regulating the relations of all things, and on this account he may be regarded as the philosopher of numbers. Philolaus, the earliest exponent of his teaching, put it in a nutshell thus: number is the principal order, the principle on which the cosmos or ordered world exists. When, 500 years ago, King Henry VI made inquiry concerning Freemasonry, he was told this: "It is the knowledge of nature and the power of its various operations, particularly the skill of reckoning, of weights and measures, or constructing dwellings and buildings of all kinds, and the truer meaning of forming all things for the use of man." And when he asked, "What do Masons conceal and hide?" his informer mentioned, among other things, the way of obtaining the faculty of ABRAC, which is, it seems, just the sort of arithmetic which I am to speak to you of in this lecture. Having regard to these facts, we are justified, I think, in expecting that any numbers, quantities, and measurements mentioned in the ritual must have a hidden significance. And, indeed, I am of the opinion that in the ritual there is nothing arbitrary, superfluous, or meaningless. I am not aware that anyone has attempted to explain how the art of counting was evolved, but having travelled extensively and gained some knowledge of the ways of other races, I may venture to give you some of my own thoughts on the subject. At the dawn of civilization, there seem to have been tribes counting by threes and tribes counting by fives. The trinal system must have been based on the intuitional conception which men had by the nature of things and persons placed in three relative positions, thus: I, thou, he, this, that, the other, 1, 2, 3. But the quinary system was based on the 5 fingers of the hand, hence the name of digits, still given to any integer under 10, a word which in Latin means fingers. It was through this method of counting among primitive men that, when in course of time someone was able to devise a system of expressing numbers as figures, each of the 9 digits came to be expressed by a separate character, as is the case in our arithmetic at the present day. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. The Greek imagination pictured 9 goddesses, the Muses, who were said to be the daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, that is, God and the memory, each of them presiding over one of their 9 liberal arts. And in the ancient Scottish rite, we find a 9th degree in which the brethren are styled elected knights of 9. Here, incidentally, I may call your attention to a curious property of the mysterious 9, which is that, whenever we add together the figures by which we express any of its multiples, we always get either another 9 or some lesser product resolvable to the same number. For example, 2 times 9 equals 18. Add 1 and 8, and you get 9. 4 times 9 equals 36. Add 3 and 6 equals 9. 11 times 9 equals 99. 12 times 9 equals 108, and so on. The tribes that counted by 3s and those that counted by 5s developed their genius independently of each other, but we should not imagine that there ever was any race of men completely detached from the rest of the world, or that owed nothing to the other races. It must have been through the intercourse of tribe and tribe that the highly useful decimal marker came to be adopted, and then, at length, somewhere, somehow, the use of this marker would suggest the cipher of our arithmetical notation, the invention of which was needed for a great achievement, for, although the cipher when it stands by itself is but an empty symbol, when conjoined with any of the 9 digits, may mean 10, hundreds, thousands, or millions. The wonderful cipher, or 0, however it may have originated, has led men to a great advance in the art of calculation. We may still call it naught, but it would be more appropriate to call it all, seeing that it purports infinity into our arithmetical operations. Our way of expressing the idea of 10 is 10, that is, a unit plus the decimal marker, and this unit signifies that on reaching 10 we have begun a new series. To the decimal marker we have given the form of a circle, and this is quite fitting too, for the circle is the emblem of eternity and infinity. What I have said thus far explains the rise of 2 of our symbolic numbers, 3 and 5. But now, what about the number 7? This is a distinctly Masonic numeral, the mystic significance of which goes far deeper than that of the other 2. It is a combination of 4 and 3, the square and the triangle, as we may see in the ceremony of raising by the steps which the candidate takes when advancing to the east. The first 4 describing a square in the centre of the lodge, and the next 3 bringing you up to the pedestal on which is the volume of the sacred law. Beneath the ground so squared there is a yawning grave, but the candidate is a living being, and his steps are emblematic at once of human life and of the 4 quarters of the globe. And as the last 3 steps indicate a triangle, which is symbolical of the great architect of the universe, the 2 numbers 4 and 3, when conjoined or combined, suggest the thought of God, brought into relations with his creatures and dominating human life. I might enlarge on this, but it would lead me beyond the limits of our subject. Having explained the origin of the 3 symbolic numbers, 3, 5, and 7, we may now make a rapid review of the ritual and see the function which each of them is made to discharge. And in this, we ought to begin with the first, that is, number 3, which is recurring constantly in connection with 1. Our organization, 2. The appointment of the lodge, 3. The traditional history, and 4. The actual mysteries or secret ritual acts in our organization. Our order stands on 3 grand principles, which are brotherly love, relief, and truth. There are 3 degrees, each degree with its respective signs, tokens, and word. There are 3 principal and 3 assistant officers, the 3 principal ones occupying 3 different quarters of the globe, east, south, and west. The distinguishing characteristic of a good Freemason are 3: virtue, honour, and mercy. There are 3 main lines of duty: to God, to our neighbour, and to ourselves. 3 sacred dictates of truth, honour, and of virtue. 3 foremost excellences of character: secrecy, fidelity, and obedience. 3 lowest staves in the mystic ladder, which are said to be emblematic of the 3 graces: faith, hope, and charity. Also there are the 3 most celebrated orders of architecture: the Ionic, the Doric, and the Corinthian. In the appointment of the lodge, there are 3 sets of tools for each degree, that is, a different set of 3 tools for each one of the 3 classes of workmen. There are 3 Masonic reasons why the lodge should be situated east and west. The interior of a Freemason's lodge is composed of ornaments, furniture, and jewels. The ornaments are 3 in number: the mosaic pavement, the blazing star, and the indented or tessellated border. The furniture too comprises 3 articles, which are the volume of the sacred law, the square, and the compasses, while the jewels are 6, 3 movable and 3 immovable. Similarly, the Master Mason's lodge is said to be distinguished by 3 ornaments: the porch, the dormer, and the square pavement. The emblems of mortality are 3: the coffin, the skull, and the crossbones. There are, we are told, 3 pillars supporting the lodge: wisdom, strength, and beauty. There are also 3 greater lights and 3 lesser ones. In the traditional history, the first lodge is said to have been consecrated with 3 grand offerings. The chapiters of the pillars are described as enriched with 3 varieties of ornamentation: network, lilywork, and pomegranates, and these are said to symbolize unity, peace, and plenty. The entered apprentices employed in King Solomon's temple received a weekly allowance of corn, wine, and oil, which may be said to answer to what the present-day labourer still regards as the 3 necessities of life: bread, beer, and butter. At the time of the Great Conspiracy, there were but 3 men who possessed the secrets of a Master Mason. There were 3 Grand Masters who bore sway at the building of the first Temple of Jerusalem. The secrets of the Master could only be imparted with the consent and by the joint action of 3. The trusty fellowcrafts divided themselves into 3 companies or lodges. Our Master was slain with 3 blows, struck by 3 different men on 3 parts of the head, with 3 different tools at 3 points of exit of King Solomon's temple, situated on the south, north, and east sides. In the mysteries, the lodge opens and closes with 3 knocks, and every candidate gains admission by 3 knocks, given differently at each degree. In every degree, the candidate who seeks the privilege corresponding to it by a 3-fold plea: by the help of God, being free and of good report, or by the help of God and with the assistance of the square and the benefit of the password, or by the help of God, the united aid of the square and compasses, as well as the benefit of the password. On opening the lodge, the worshipful Master prays for 3 things: order, peace, and harmony. Every initiate is made to strike the right of the senior and junior wardens with 3 knocks. He is made to advance to the pedestal by 3 steps. He has to answer 3 searching questions told of the worshipful Master. He is told of the 3 dangers, the 3 reasons for soliciting his charity, the 3 aspects of his character, also of the 3-fold way of dividing the 24 hours of the day, some for prayer to Almighty God, some for labour and refreshment, and some for serving a friend or brother. In the second degree, the sign is of a threefold nature. In order to raise the candidate to the sublime degree of a Master Mason, 3 methods are tried. Only the third can succeed. In closing the Fellowcraft Lodge, the dismissal formula recited by the Junior Warden alone is also of a threefold nature. In the ordinary way of closing the lodge, according to ancient custom, all the brethren present unite in a threefold sign of fidelity, fidelity, fidelity. The Master Mason, when raised, is asked to make his solemn obligation binding for as long as he shall live by sealing it with his lips 3 times on the volume of the sacred law. We also frequently have a threefold perambulation of the lodge. This long list does not exhaust all the references to the symbolic 3 occurring in the ritual, but it should suffice to show the important part that number plays in it. We may now pass on to consider the next number, 5. 3 rule a lodge, but 5 hold it, which means that there cannot be a lodge with less than 5 members. The Fellowcrafts of the traditional history form themselves into 3 companies, that is, 3 lodges of 5 members. When the entered apprentice comes into the Fellowcraft Lodge in order to be passed, he is taught to advance to the east by 5 steps. We acknowledge the 5 orders of architecture. The blazing star is one of 5 points. There are 5 secret words. There are 5 points of fellowship for us all, and these are said to correspond in number to the 5 signs of the 3rd degree. The grave of our Master was 5 or more feet deep. The chapiters on the pillars at the porch or entrance of King Solomon's temple were 5 cubits high. And now, as regards the number 7. 7 is the number by which the lodge is made perfect. In every properly constituted lodge, there are 7 officers, that is, including the tiler and the outer guard. The first tracing board exhibits 7 stars, which have an allusion to as many regular made masons. In the ceremony of raising, the method of advancing is by 7 steps. We are told that King Solomon's temple was 7 years and upwards in building. The height of the 2 pillars was 17.5 cubits, which equals 7 plus 7 plus 3.5. Or the 2 pillars conjointly 35 cubits, which equals 5 times 7. The qualifications required from the would-be Master Mason are given thus: just, upright, free, men, of mature age, sound judgment, and strict morals. The qualification of mature age is explained as meaning the full age of 21 years, which equals 3 times 7. Finally, there are the 7 liberal arts and sciences on which Freemasonry has been founded: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. But now, after this rapid survey of the ritual, we shall find that these symbolic numbers, 3, 5, and 7, important as they appear, are but fractions of what may be called the summum numerorum. Thus, 3 plus 5 plus 7 equals 15. I shall throw some new light on the mystic significance of this number in the second part of the lecture. Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's video is part 2 of the Arithmetic of Freemasonry by F.P. de Castells from 1914. It turns out that there's so much in this lecture that I think it's going to be a 3-parter now, so tonight's part refers specifically to the number 15. Part 3 will be a bit more wide-ranging and will refer to what Castells refers to as the metrology of the craft.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
After this rapid survey of the ritual, we shall now examine the summum numerorum, the number 15. I hope to throw some new light on the mystic significance of this number, but first of all, I beg leave to call your attention to its internal harmonies. It has been said that there is divinity in odd numbers, and the number 15 is remarkable in many ways. It combines the first two of our symbolic numbers, for 3 times 5 equals 15, and strangely enough, the two numbers, 3 and 5 joined together, represent 35, which equals 5 times 7. The other two symbolic numbers. Moreover, if we multiply the three numbers 3 times 5 times 7, the result is 105, their lowest common multiple, which also equals 7 times 15, and is practically the same number, 15, with the naught inserted between the figures. Chronologically, a period of 15 days is that which is enclosed within 3 Sabbaths. Many of the ancient nations held their great festivals on the 15th day of a month, and they usually followed the lunar year. The moon must have been full at that time. In Greece, the ceremonies of initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries, both in the autumn and in the spring, began on the 15th day of the month and lasted 9 days. Note that these 9 days equal 3 times 3. In music, the number 15 represents 2 complete scales, that is, the notes comprise between 3 Cs. As 5 stands for 1 hand, 15 equals 3 hands, and there is somewhere a chapter which has for its distinctive badge a triangle within which we see 2 hands stretched out from the sides and grasping each other, while a third hand, descending from the apex, holds up both of them. Although the interpretation of this symbol belongs to the Royal Arch, we may all read a beautiful thought into it, that of fraternal union on earth, maintained under the protection of the Most High. In the trinal system of primitive man, the numbers 6 and 9, which are the first trine doubled and trebled, were considered round numbers, and adding them together, we get 6 plus 9 equals 15. Then, too, the number 15 combines the 2 leading terms of the decimal system, 10 plus 5, which reminds us of the fact that the decimal system, now acknowledged to be the most perfect system of arithmetic, is but the early method of counting by 5s, that is to say, by the fingers of the hand. There really is nothing new under the sun. But suppose we take the first 5 digits as representing a progressive arithmetical series, and that we add them up. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. Again, the total will be 15, and if we add up all the 9 digits in the same way, then we bring the total to 45, which equals 3 times 15, and is half the number of the square. 45 plus 45 equals 90. This I've illustrated by a diagram thus, which has a pile of bricks arranged in that same progressive order. Look for a moment at this magic square. In it, the 9 digits are arranged in 3 rows, 3 times 3, and however the figures may be added up, vertically, horizontally, or diagonally, the sum of every 3 is always the same, 15. The key to the various operations possible is to be found in the symbols from which we obtain the Masonic alphabet. No other arrangement of the numbers will ever yield such harmony. Please observe that the central column consists of the symbolic 3, 5, 7, the first at the bottom, 5 in the centre, 7 above. 5 stands between 1 and 9, the unit which is the root of all number, and 9 the highest digit. These two together complete the decade. My object in calling your attention to these facts is to show that the use of the number 15 in our Masonic symbolism is not arbitrary. It is the best the ancients could have chosen to convey the idea of fullness or completeness. Let us see, therefore, how it is that the number comes into the ritual. I have said before that we open and close the lodge with 3 knocks, but it would be equally correct to say that we open and close the lodge with 15 knocks, because the knocks prescribed by the ritual are struck successively by the worshipful master, the senior and junior wardens, and by both the inner and outer guards. 5 officers in all, and 5 times 3 make 15. Then, we know how the candidate advances to the place of light by stages, which are measured by a fixed number of steps. The entered apprentice takes 3, the fellow craft 5, the master mason 7. Add up all these and you have 15 as the total. This advancing order in the steps of each degree is foreshadowed by the entered apprentice at his initiation, for in his case the steps are of varying length. The second is of a little longer than the first, and the third a little longer than the second, as expressed by the numerical proportion of 3, 5, 7. In the explanation of the second tracing board, we read that our ancient brethren passed up the winding staircase consisting of 3, 5, 7 or more steps, and these correspond with the steps taken by our candidates. And it should be observed that the phrase, or more steps, does not imply any uncertainty as to the height of the staircase. It is merely a necessary reservation, the margin allowed for the requirements of the higher degrees. In the traditional history of the third degree, we hear a conspiracy organised by 15 fellowcrafts. They were of that superior class appointed to preside over the rest, which means the order now denominated Master Masons. Out of the 15, 12 recanted, but 3 proved to be of a determined and atrocious character, and were responsible for a great tragedy. As against these rebellious fellowcrafts, there are mentioned another 15 who went to search for our master, Hiram Abiff, and we read that when these 15 trusty fellowcrafts were commissioned by King Solomon for their work, they divided themselves into 3 companies, which means, of course, 3 fellowcraft lodges of 5 members each. 1 company sought and found not. 1 company made the discovery, and the 3rd company brought the evildoers to judgment. What then are we to think of the 30 fellowcrafts? In my opinion, they are emblematic of the struggle which is ever going on in the world between antagonistic forces, with which every human being is more or less acquainted. The evil being ever envious of the good, the ambitious seeking to achieve success by deceit and rapacity, and extreme cases by the most heinous crimes. The selfish and greedy thwarting and defeating the very ideals they profess to admire. All this in the hope of obtaining wealth, position, or power. And Freemasonry steps in and counsels to substitute virtue, industry, and perseverance for dishonesty, covetousness, and violence, and to aim at the happiness of the fraternity. We may see the counterpart of this in the 2 intersected triangles shown on the 2nd degree tracing board. One of the triangles is black and the other white, and the 2 are united by the letter G, inscribed in the common centre. I believe that the tragedy in the forefront of the volume of the Sacred Law, Cain slaying his brother Abel, was intended to illustrate the same conception of life which is inculcated by Freemasonry. And the Chinese have from time immemorial represented this struggle which is ever going on by the symbol they call yin-yang. In the tracing board of the Master Mason, there is another memorial of the death of our master. It takes the form of 3 5s arranged triangularly, thus They suggest an equilateral triangle, each 5 representing one side, but we know that historically they correspond to the 3 methods tried for the purpose of bringing back to life the ideal man. The 3 5s, therefore, are the 3 hands, with 15 fingers in all. There has been confusion over this, and some rituals have been put forth that give the fellow crafts of the traditional history as 12 in number instead of 15. It seems to have arisen from certain distinctions being overlooked or forgotten. Let us remember that while the tradition mentions 2 companies of 15 fellow crafts in each case, they are divided into 12 plus 3, because 1/3 of the rebellious fellow crafts are held responsible for the murder of our master. 3 hands struck the fatal blows, and 3 hands were exerted in raising the dead body. On this account, both death and life may be expressed by 3 5s or 3 hands. In closing the Fellowcraft Lodge, the wardens report the discovery of a sacred symbol, said to be situated in the centre of the building, and this may be explained by what we read elsewhere. When our ancient brethren were in the middle chamber of the temple, their attention was peculiarly drawn to certain Hebrew characters, which are here depicted by a letter G, denoting God, the grand geometrician of the universe, to whom we must all submit and whom we ought humbly to adore. According to this, the cryptic G is but our modern substitute for the Hebrew characters depicted in the same tracing board just over the door at the top of the staircase. These characters are now commonly read as Jehovah, but the name was always considered too sacred to be pronounced by human lips, and the Jews themselves, in order not to write it, have frequently expressed it only with the initial Yod. In speaking of this, however, it is necessary to bear in mind that the characters of the Hebrew alphabet were numbers as well as letters. That is, they could be made to stand alternatively for a quantity or a sound. Here are the first 10 of them with their corresponding numerical value. We see then that the letter Yod, the initial of the name Jehovah, when used numerically, represented the number 10, a fact which has afforded ground for much speculation. As previously shown, the Yod, standing for 10, may be regarded as emblematic of the perfect system of arithmetic. Some Jewish rabbis, known as the Kabbalists, pointed out that the divine name in Hebrew consists of 4 letters, hence called the Tetragrammaton, or 4-lettered name, and by taking 1, 2, 3, 4 as a series, they reached the total of 10, which agreed with the face value of the initial. In this, the Kabbalists came in touch with Pythagoras and his holy quaternion, or in Greek, Tetractus, for Pythagoras held that 4, the first square number, was the potential decade, and it stood for the cosmic elements fire, air, earth, and water. Sometimes the 4 Hebrew letters were arranged thus. When combined, the numerical value of the 10 characters gave a total of 72, which the Jews regard as an important symbolic number, and sometimes, in seeking to abbreviate the incommunicable name of God, they doubled or trebled the initial Yod, thus. In each of these cases, the result is a distinct triangle, but you may see that while the first is pointing down, the second is pointing up, and numerically, while the 2 Yods equal 20, the 3 equal 30. There is one more way of abbreviating the ineffable name, one which did not originate with the Kabbalists, but is found in actual use in the Psalms, and may therefore be regarded as authorized by the volume of the sacred law. I mean that which consists in writing the first 2 letters of the name. Read phonetically, they spell Yah or Jah, but arithmetically they should represent the number 15, that is, 10 plus 5. The Jews used to express the numbers from 10 to 20 by writing 10 plus 1, 10 plus 2, 10 plus 3, 10 plus 4, etc. But when they came to 15, they found that the two characters required were associated with the ineffable name of God, and so they varied the order, writing instead of 10 plus 5, 9 plus 6. We have seen that in our Masonic symbolism, the number 15 has been made to embody the idea of fullness or totality. And now, if we look again into the ritual, we may find a further illustration of this idea. For in the explanation of the second tracing board, the Worshipful Master refers to the practical significance of the symbolic numbers 3, 5, 7, and reminds us that a lodge is ruled by 3, held or organized by 5, and made perfect by 7. In this way, those symbolic numbers suggest 3 leading ideas: government, organization, and perfect development. And as the number 15 is reached by combining the 3 numbers 3 plus 5 plus 7 equals 15, we may regard this sum as comprehending all those ideas, and as being a fitting emblem of the grand ideal of Freemasonry. In the ancient Scottish rite, the members of the 10th degree are called illustrious Knights of 15, as having attained to the fullness of this ideal. Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight is the third part of this reading of the wonderful 1914 lecture by F. de P. Castell's The Arithmetic of Freemasonry. Tonight's section refers specifically to the metrology of the craft.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
I have undertaken to say something of the metrology of the craft, and I will proceed to do so because it is a subject that stands closely allied with our arithmetic, but time compels me to be brief. The length measures mentioned in the ritual are 5, the 2 modern ones, the inch and the foot, the 2 ancient ones, the hand breadth and the cubit, and one which is very ancient, although not a familiar one, the cable's length. The word inch comes from the Latin uncia, meaning 1/12th part of anything, and in this connection it indicates a 12th part of a man's foot, which was early adopted as a length measure, being of course standardized everywhere. But in the ritual, the 24-inch gauge is used as emblematic of time. When the Worshipful Master gives the entered apprentice his tools, he says that the 24-inch gauge represents the 24 hours of the day, and it may be used in 2 ways: to graduate his task and to divide each passing day so as to allow of his attending to everything: his devotions, his regular employment, and the discharge of his social obligations. As the fingers of the hand have played an important part in the development of the art of counting, so too they supplied the basis for the art of mensuration all over the East, all the high metrical values consisting of so many palms or hands breadths, which, like the foot, had to be standardized. In the explanation of the second tracing board, we learn that the outer rim of the twin pillars of the porchway of King Solomon's temple was a hand's breadth in thickness. This statement agrees with the first book of Kings, chapter 6, verse 15. Elsewhere, Jeremiah 52, verse 21, we read that it was 4 fingers thick, and so I shall point out that in this there is no real contradiction, because the hand's breadth of the ritual is to be understood as being not the breadth of the open or extended hand, but that of the back of a clenched hand, in which only 4 fingers are seen. Theoretically, the cubit was the length of the forearm, from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger. But unfortunately, as each nation adopted a different standard, we find a great deal of variety in cubits. Indeed, some nations had 2 or 3 sorts of cubits, according to the objects that had to be measured. This may explain the confusion and the controversy that there has been as to the actual length of the cubit employed in designing King Solomon's temple. In Egypt, there were 2 different cubits, the short, which was one of 6, and the royal, which was one of 7 palms of handbreadths. In Babylonia, there were 3 measurements known by that name, one of 3 palms, used in measuring fine decorative work and gold ornaments, one of 4 palms, which was used ordinarily for all masonry work, and one of 5 palms, which was used in measuring land spaces. By the recovery of 2 scales of linear measurements engraved on the statues of Gudea, nearly 5,000 years old, we have found that these 3 cubits equaled 10.8, 14.4, and 18 inches respectively. Some archaeologists argue that both King Solomon's temple and in the tabernacle, all 3 cubits of ancient Babylonia were used. On this calculation, the thickness of the pillars would be equivalent to 3.6 inches of our present-day measure, although even now we cannot be quite certain. Finally, about the cable's length. When this expression is now used by sailors, they mean to indicate a distance of about 100 fathoms, or the 10th part of a nautical mile. But as used in the ritual, at least a cable's length from the shore, it means a distance equal to the length of a coil of cable, which has always been understood to be 120 fathoms, that is to say, 720 feet. The idea is that being buried in the sands at the bottom of the sea at that distance from low water mark, as a minimum, the remains of a traitor might be considered to be definitively consigned to everlasting disgrace, and therefore as having absolutely perished. No trace or remembrance being any longer conceivable. This cable's length must not be confused with the length of my cable tow, mentioned in another part of the ritual. This latter being a figure of speech intended to convey the idea of one's ability to execute an acknowledged obligation, the power to fulfill one's own responsibilities in life. The introduction of the cable into the ceremonies may appear strange, but apart from other considerations, if we only bear in mind the way the cable has been manufactured from time immemorial, we shall recognize that it is a very suitable emblem for the threefold cord which is not easily broken, of brotherly love, relief, and truth. In a book compiled nearly 100 years ago, there is a description of it. Every cable, of whatsoever thickness it be, is composed of 3 strands, every strand of 3 ropes, and every rope of 3 twists. The twist is made of more or less threads according as the cable is to be thicker or thinner. The ritual anticipates that after this life every master mason shall be decently interred, but the penalty of our obligation in the 3rd degree involves the very opposite of that idea. I shall therefore close this lecture with a few words on the dimensions of the grave of the 3rd degree and their significance. I have spoken of fathoms, saying that a cable's length equals 120 fathoms, but the fathom is not named in the ritual. It may be defined as the measure of a man's embrace, fixed for all practical purposes at 6 feet, and therefore, although not expressly named, it is the length of the grave which the trusty fellowcrafts of our traditional history are said to have prepared. It was from a centre of 3 feet east and 3 feet west. This is an unusual form of expression, but we may account for it by observing that the navel is regarded as lying in the centre. Remember where the Master Mason rests his squared hands when he stands to order. The navel is our link with the past, and inasmuch as being buried, the body returns to the bosom of our common mother, the old link is very properly viewed as the central point in the grave. The width of the grave between north and south was 3 feet. These dimensions are still the ordinary minimum dimensions of an adult's grave at the present time, but in the ritual they are given for a practical purpose, being emblematic. As the area was one of 18 square feet, 6 by 3 equals 18, 9 to the east and 9 to the west, and as the depth was a minimum of 5 feet, the total capacity of the grave was of 90 cubic feet, which is the number by which we define the square, an angle of 90 degrees. The cubic measurement of the grave, therefore, is but another way of representing the square. By being laid under the sod, back to the bosom of Mother Earth, we come into the closest possible fellowship with one another, and the depth of 5 feet harmonizes with our 5 points of fellowship. In assigning such dimensions to the grave, therefore, the ritual may be said to bring our symbolism into the reign of death, and we, by endorsing and adopting its provisions, are testifying to the fact that the bond which unites Master Masons in this life is not broken when we are let down into the tomb of transgression. Having ordered our life according to the square, we take that sign with us to the grave, and we may rest assured that when we finally rise from the last resting place, the same old sign will procure our admission into the grand lodge above, where the world's great architect lives and reigns forever. Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's video is a short introductory extract from William Wynne Westcott's 1911 work, Numbers, Their Occult Power and Mystic Virtues. I remember reading this book, 20 or 30 years ago, so this is very much a refresher for me, as it may well be for you. If you enjoy this presentation, let me know in the comments, because there's a lot in the work that I think could make interesting videos downstream. I'll wait for some feedback to see if people are interested. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy Numbers, Their Occult Power and Mystic Virtues, Pythagoras, His Tenets and His Followers.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
Pythagoras, one of the greatest philosophers of ancient Europe, was the son of Nicephorus, an engraver. He was born about the year 580 BC, either at Samos, an island in the Aegean Sea, or, as some say, at Sidon in Phoenicia. Very little is known of his early life, beyond the fact that he won prizes for feats of agility at the Olympic Games. Having attained manhood, and feeling dissatisfied with the amount of knowledge to be gained at home, he left his native land and spent many years in travel, visiting, in turn, most of the great centres of learning. History narrates that his pilgrimage in search of wisdom extended to Egypt, Hindustan, Persia, Crete, and Palestine, and that he gathered from each country fresh stores of information and succeeded in becoming well acquainted with the esoteric wisdom as well as with the popular exoteric knowledge of each. He returned with his mind well stored and his judgment matured to his home, intending to open there a college of learning, but this he found to be impracticable owing to the opposition of its turbulent ruler Polycrates. Failing in this design, he migrated to Crotona, a noted city in Magna Graecia, which was a colony founded by Dorians on the south coast of Italy. It was here that this ever-famous philosopher founded his college or society of students, which became known all over the civilized world as the Central Assembly of the Learned of Europe. And here it was, in secret conclave, that Pythagoras taught that occult wisdom which he had gathered from the gymnophocists and Brahmins of India, from the hierophants of Egypt, from the oracle at Delphi, the Idaean cave, and from the Kabbalah of the Hebrew rabbis and the Chaldean magi. For nearly 40 years he taught his pupils and exhibited his wonderful powers. But an end was put to his institution, and he himself was forced to flee from the city owing to a conspiracy and rebellion which arose on account of a quarrel between the people of Crotona and the inhabitants of Sybaris. He succeeded in reaching Metapontum, where he is said to have died about the year 500 BC. Among the ancient authors from whom we derive our knowledge of the life and doctrines of Pythagoras and his successors, the following are notable. 450 BC, Herodotus, who speaks of the mysteries of the Pythagoreans as similar to those of Orpheus. 394 BC, Archytas of Tarentum, who left a fragment upon Pythagorean arithmetic. 380 BC, Theon of Smyrna. 370 BC, Philolaus. From 3 books of this author, it is believed that Plato compiled his book Timaeus. He was probably the first who committed to writing the doctrines of Pythagoras. 322 BC, Aristotle. Refer to his Metaphysics, Moralia Magna, and Nicomachean Ethics. 276 BC, Eratosthenes, author of a work entitled Kokinon, or Cribrum, a sieve to separate prime from composite numbers. 40 BC, Cicero. Refer to his works De Finibus and De Natura Deorum. 50 AD, Nicomachus of Gerasa, treatises on arithmetic and harmony. 300 AD, Porphyry of Tyre, a great philosopher, sometimes named in Syriac Melech or King. He was the pupil of Longinus and Plotinus. 340 AD, Jamblichus wrote De Mysteriis, De Vita Pythagorica, the Arithmetic of Nicomachus of Gerasa, and the Theological Properties of Numbers. 450 AD, Proclus, in his commentary on the works and days of Hesiod, gives information concerning the Pythagorean view of numbers. 560 AD, Simplicius of Sicilia, a contemporary of Justinian. 850 AD, Photius of Constantinople has left a bibliotheca of the ideas of the older philosophers. Coming down to more recent times, the following authors should be consulted: Johannes Mercius of 1620, Marcus Meibomius, 1650, and Athanasius Kircher in 1660. They collected and epitomized all that was extant of previous authors concerning the doctrines of the Pythagoreans. The first eminent follower of Pythagoras was Aristeas, who married Theano, the widow of his master. Next followed Nisakas, the son of Pythagoras, and later Balagoras, Titus, and Diodorus the Aspendian. After the original school was dispersed, the chief instructors became Plinius and Philolaus at Heraclea, Theorides and Eurytus at Metapontum, and Archytas, the sage of Tarentum. The school of Pythagoras had several peculiar characteristics. Every new member was obliged to pass a period of 5 years in contemplation in perfect silence. The members held everything in common and rejected animal food. They were believers in the doctrines of metempsychosis and were inspired with an ardent and implicit faith in their founder and teacher. So much did the element of faith into their training that autos effa, he said it, was to them complete proof. Intense fraternal affection between pupils was also a marked feature of the school. Hence their saying, "My friend is my other self," which has become a byword to this day. The teaching was, in great measure, secret, and certain studies and knowledge were allotted to each class and grade of instruction. Merit and ability alone sufficed to enable anyone to pass to the higher classes and to a knowledge of the more recondite mysteries. No person was permitted to commit to writing any tenet or secret doctrine, and, so far as is known, no pupil ever broke the rule until after his death and the dispersion of the school. We are, thus, entirely dependent on the scraps of information which have been handed down to us from his successors and from his and their critics. A considerable amount of uncertainty, therefore, is inseparable from any consideration of the real doctrines of Pythagoras himself, but we are on surer ground when we investigate the opinions of his followers. It is recorded that his instruction to his followers was formulated into 2 great divisions: the science of numbers and the theory of magnitude. The former division included 2 branches, arithmetic and musical harmony. The latter was further subdivided into the consideration of magnitude at rest, geometry, and magnitude in motion, astronomy. The most striking peculiarities of his doctrine are dependent on the mathematical conceptions, numerical ideas, and impersonations upon which his philosophy was founded. The principles governing numbers were supposed to be the principles of all real existences, and as numbers are the primary constituents of mathematical quantities, and at the same time present many analogies to various realities, it was further inferred that the elements of numbers were the elements of the realities. To Pythagoras himself, it is believed that the natives of Europe owe the first teaching of the properties of numbers, of the principles of music, and of physics. But there is evidence that he had visited Central Asia, and there had acquired the mathematical ideas which form the basis of his doctrine. The modes of thought introduced by Pythagoras and followed by his successor Jamblichus and others became known later on by the titles of the Italian school or the Doric school. The followers of Pythagoras delivered their knowledge to pupils fitted by selection and training to receive it in secret, but to others by numerical and mathematical names and notions. Hence they called forms numbers, a point the monad, a line the dyad, a superficies the triad, and a solid the tetrad. Intuitive knowledge was referred to the monad type. Reason and causation was referred to the dyad type. Imagination, form, or rupa, was referred to the triad type, and sensation of material objects was referred to the tetrad type. Indeed, they referred to every object, planet, man, idea, and essence, to some number or other in a way which to most moderns must seem curious and mystical in the highest degree. The numerals of Pythagoras, says Porphyry, who lived about 300 AD, were hieroglyphic symbols by means whereof he explained all ideas concerning the nature of things. And the same method of explaining the secrets of nature is once again being insisted upon in the new revelation of the secret doctrine by H.P. Blavatsky. Numbers are a key to the ancient views of cosmogony in its broad sense, spiritually as well as physically considered, and to the evolution of the present human race. All systems of religious mysticism are based upon numerals. The sacredness of numbers begins with the great first cause, the One, and ends only with the naught or zero, symbol of the infinite and boundless universe. Tradition narrates that the students of the Pythagorean school, at first classed as exotericai or osculantes, listeners, were privileged to rise by merit and ability to the higher grades of genuini, perfecti, mathematici, or the most coveted title, esotericai. Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's video is a continuation of a presentation from a few weeks ago, Pythagoras, his tenets and his followers. In it, we will continue our exploration of William Wynne Westcott's magisterial 1911 work, Numbers, Their Occult Power and Mystic Virtues. This is a significantly more complex video than the previous presentation, so I've tried to make the more arcane numerology clearer through the use of animations, so bear with it. I've divided the presentation into two sections that were not part of the original work. The first deals with the properties and features of odd and even numbers, while the second looks more at the interpretations that can be made of the preceding discourse. I really hope you enjoy it.
Why come not angels from the realms of glory to visit earth, as in the days of old? Is heaven more distant, or has earth grown cold?
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
The foundation of Pythagorean mathematics was as follows. The first natural division of numbers is into even and odd, an even number being one which is divisible into two equal parts, without leaving a monad between them. The odd number, when divided into two equal parts, leaves the monad in the middle, between the parts. All even numbers also, except the dyad 2, which is simply two unities, may be divided into two equal parts, and also into two unequal parts, yet so that neither division will either parity be mingled with imparity, nor imparity with parity. The binary number 2 cannot be divided into two unequal parts. Thus, 10 divides into 5 and 5, equal parts, also into 3 and 7, both imparities, and into 6 and 4, which are both parities, and 8 divides into 4 and 4, equals and parities, and into 5 and 3, both imparities. But the odd number is only divisible into uneven parts, and one part is also a parity, and the other part an imparity. Thus, 7 into 4 and 3, or 5 and 2, in both cases unequal, and odd, and even. The ancients also remarked the monad to be odd, and to be the first odd number because it cannot be divided into two equal numbers. Another reason they saw was that the monad added to an even number became an odd number, but if evens are added to evens, the result is an even number. Aristotle, in his Pythagoric treatise, remarks that the monad partakes also of the nature of the even number, because when added to the odd, it makes the even, and when added to the even, the odd is formed. Hence, it is called evenly odd. Archytas of Tarentum was of the same opinion. The monad, then, is the first idea of the odd number, and so the Pythagoreans speak of the 2 as the first idea of the indefinite dyad, and attribute the number 2 to that which is indefinite, unknown, and inordinate in the world, just as they adapted the monad to all that is definite and orderly. They noted also that in the series of numbers from unity, the terms are increased each by the monad once added, and so their ratios to each other are lessened. Thus, 2 is 1 plus 1, or double its predecessor. 3 is not double 2, but 2 and the monad sesquialter. 4 to 3 is 3 and the monad, and the ratio is sesquiterrion. The sesquiquinton 6 to 5 is also less than its forerunner, the sesquiquarton 5 and 4, and so on throughout the series. They also noted that every number is 1/2 of the total of the numbers about it in the natural series. Thus, 5 is half of 6 plus 4. And also, the sum of the numbers again above and below this pair. Thus 5 is also half of 7 and 3, and so on until unity is reached. For the monad alone has not two terms, one below and one above. It has one above it only. Hence it is said to be the source of all multitude. Evenly even is another term applied anciently to one sort of even numbers. Such are those which divide into two equal parts, and each part divides evenly, and the even division is continued until unity is reached. Such a number is 64. These numbers form a series in duple ratio from unity. Thus, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32. Evenly odd, applied to an even number, points out that like 6, 10, 14, and 28, when divided into two equal parts, these are found to be indivisible into equal parts. A series of these numbers is formed by doubling the items of a series of odd numbers. Thus, 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 produce 2, 6, 10, 14, and 18. Unevenly even numbers may be parted into two equal divisions, and these parts again equally divided, but the process does not proceed until unity is reached. Such numbers are 24 and 28. Odd numbers are also susceptible of being looked upon from 3 points of view. Thus, first and incomplete, such are 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 19, 23, 29, and 31. No other number measures them but unity. They are not composed of other numbers, but are generated from unity alone. Second and composite are indeed odd, but contain and are composed from other numbers. Such are 9, 15, 21, 25, 27, 33, and 39. These have parts which are denominated from a foreign number or word, as well as a proper unity. Thus, 9 has a third part which is 3, 15 has a third part which is 5, and a fifth part 3. Hence, as containing a foreign part, it is called second, and as containing a divisibility, it is composite. The third variety of odd numbers is more complex, and is of itself second and composite, but with reference to another is first and incomposite. Such are 9 and 25. These are divisible, each of them, that is second and composite, yet have no common measure. Thus, 3, which divides the 9, does not divide the 25. Odd numbers are sorted out into these 3 classes by a device called the sieve of Eratosthenes, which is of too complex a nature to form a part of this monograph, so discursive as it must be. Even numbers have also been divided by the ancient sages into perfect, deficient, and superabundant. Superperfect or superabundant are such as 12 and 24. Deficient are such as 8 and 14. Perfect are such as 6 and 28, equal to the number of their parts, as 28, half is 14, a fourth is 7, a seventh is 4, a 14th part is 2, and the 28th is 1, which quotients added together are 28. In deficient numbers, such as 14, the parts are surpassed by the whole. 1/7 is 2, a half is 7, a 14th is 1. The aggregate is 10 or less than 14. In superabundant, as 12, the whole surpasses the aggregate of its parts. Thus, the 6th is 2, a 4th is 3, a 3rd is 4, a half is 6, and a 12th is 1, and the aggregate is 16 or more than 12. Superperfect numbers they looked upon as being similar to Briareus, the 100-handed giant. His parts were too numerous. The deficient numbers resembled Cyclops, who had but one eye, whilst the perfect numbers have the temperament of a middle limit and are the emulators of virtue, a medium between excess and defect, not the summit, as some ancients falsely thought. Evil is indeed opposed to evil, but both to one good. Good, however, is never opposed to good, but to 2 evils. The perfect numbers are also like the virtues, few in number, whilst the other 2 classes are like the vices, numerous, insubordinate, and indefinite. There is but one perfect number between 1 and 10, that is 6. Only one between 10 and 100, that is 28. Only one between 100 and 1,000, that is 496. And between 1,000 and 10,000, only one, that is 8,128. Odd numbers they called gnomons, because, being added to squares, they keep the same figures as in geometry. A number which is formed by the multiplication of an odd and an even number together, they called hermaphrodite. In connection with these notes on parity and imparity, definite and indefinite numbers, it is to be noted that the old philosophers were deeply imbued with the union of numerical ideas with nature, in its common acception, and also to the natures, essences, or substrata of things. The nature of good to them was definite, that of evil indefinite, and the more indefinite the nature of the evil, the worse it was. Goodness alone can define or bound the indefinite. In the human soul exists a certain vestige of divine goodness. This bounds and moderates the indefiniteness and inequality of its desires. It may be demonstrated that all inequality arises from equality, so that obtaining it, as it were, the power of a mother and a root, she pours forth with exuberant fertility all sorts of inequality. And, did space and time allow, it could be also shown that all inequality may be reduced to equality. Iamblichus, in his treatise on the Arithmetic of Nicomachus, throws another light on numbers. He says some are like friends. They are amicable numbers, such as 284 and 220. Pythagoras, being asked what a friend was, said, "Another eye." Now this is demonstrated to be the case in these numbers. The parts of each are generative of each other, according to the nature of friendship. Ozanam, a French mathematician, in 1710 gives examples in his mathematical recreations of such amicable numbers. He remarks that 220 is equal to the sum of the aliquot parts of 284. Thus, 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 71 plus 142 equals 220. And 284 is equal to the sum of the aliquot parts of 220. Thus, 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 5 plus 10 plus 11 plus 20 plus 22 plus 44 plus 55 plus 110 equals 284. Another such pair of numbers are 17,296 and 18,416, but for purposes of brevity, I won't go through those now. Very curious speculations as to the relation between numbers and marriage, and the character of offspring from it, are to be found scattered throughout the writings of the philosophers. Plato, in his Republic, has a passage concerning a geometric number, which, divinely generated, will be fortunate or unfortunate. Nicomachus also speaks of this same number, and he calls it the nuptial number, and he passes from it to state that from two good parents only good offspring can come, from two bad parents only bad, and from a good and a bad parent only bad. Whence he warns the Republic against wedlock in a confused or disorderly manner, from which the progeny being depraved, discord will result. Simplicius, in his commentary on the second book of Aristotle on the heavens, remarks that Pythagoras and his followers claim to have heard the music of the spheres, to have heard an harmonic sound produced by the motion of the planets, and from the sound to have calculated by numbers the ratio of distance and the size of the Sun, Moon, Venus, and Mercury. To this Aristotle objected, but perhaps the difficulty might be solved. In this sublunary sphere, all things are not commensurate, nor is everything sensible to every body alike. Animals can be scented and their presence definitely known by dogs when at great distances from them, when man is in complete ignorance of their existence. Some of the ancients thought that the soul had three vehicles: the terrestrial body, an aerial one which is punished, and an ethereal one, luminous and celestial, in which the soul abides when in a state of bliss. It may be that someone, by purification of the senses, by hereditary magical powers, or by probity, or by the sacred operations of his religion, may perceive with a terrestrial body laid aside things imperceptible to us, and hear sounds inaudible to us, still in bondage, or with mantle partly unfolded, some adept or truth-seeker may perceive, with eyes upraised, sights invisible to mortals, whilst yet his ears are deaf to the sound beyond us both. For why do we see the stars, while yet we hear not their motion?
Why come not angels from the realms of glory to visit earth, as in the days of old? Is heaven more distant, or has earth grown cold?
For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons for Freemasons. Visit fromthequarries.com or YouTube at From the Quarries.